me the story of Jesus. Write on my heart every word. Tell me the story most precious, sweetest that ever was heard. Love in that story so tender, clearer than ever I see. Say, let me read while you whisper, love paid the ransom for me. Tell me the story most precious, sweetest that ever was heard.
Card in and running. Okay, I handed out a little chart to everyone. I preached this once before here, but there were a lot of people that were absent. It was on my first solo trip in, that had been August of, just right after the church was formed. And it was on the marathon Saturday night, and most everybody had left. It was over at Jeremy and Joanna's house. Larry Wolf was there. I think you guys had gone home to take care of the dogs. I know, there were quite a few that were missing. So some of you have heard this before, but I got a couple of surprises in here that I've added to that. So there's something in here for everybody, even if you've already heard it. And that is 3 days and 3 nights. We're coming up on what they consider Holy Week, right? That's why this is Palm Sunday, right? Palm Sunday is traditionally the Sunday that Jesus entered into Jerusalem on the donkey with the palm frond. It has nothing to do with your hand. It comes from the palm fronds. I realize that. And then tradition says that Christ was crucified on Friday, that they had to get him off the cross because of the Sabbath, which begins sundown at Friday, and that he rose again at sunrise on Sunday morning. That's the tradition that you will hear in about 90% of the churches out there, but that doesn't square with Scripture. Now, a lot of people will say, well, but all of these other churches teach it. Well, of course, all of these other churches teach it. They all go back to one source. I mean, think about the history of the church. You had a bunch of little independent churches like ours for the first couple of hundred years of existence of the New Testament church. And then Constantine invited all of these little independent churches in the Roman Empire to come to a meeting so they could decide what the true church was. And about half of them showed up. Out of that half that showed up, he got a bare majority to vote in favor of his church being the true church, and then they declared all the rest of us heretics. Okay? Now, that was the Catholic Church. Now, out of the Catholic Church in the 800s, when the Roman Empire was divided, the empire ended up being two parts of the empire. The eastern part of the empire was, their capital was Constantinople. The western part of the empire was Rome. The two churches split. The Eastern Orthodox Church, which today is known as a Greek Orthodox Church. If you ever see one of those, that's what split off from the Western tradition, which is the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? So you have, coming down through history, the Catholic Church that splits in the 800s, Greek Orthodox on one side, Roman Catholic on the other side. Now, the Greek Orthodox still to this day uses the same text that we use on the Bible. They still use a Textus Receptus text. Same Old Testament text that we use. Out of the Roman Catholic Church, there have been numerous divisions. Martin Luther, who was a Roman Catholic priest, had some issues with Rome, not so much with their doctrine as with their practice. He didn't like the way they were doing certain things, and so he split away from them and nailed his thesis on the door and split off, and that ended up being the Lutheran Church. But the Lutheran Church still considers the Roman Catholic Church as the true church. She just got into some error, okay, according to their tradition. John Calvin split away, and that became the Presbyterian Church, and all the Reformed churches came from that, okay? Then there was the Church of England. And the first time I heard somebody tell me this, I thought it was a joke. And then I did my research and found out that it was actually honestly the truth. The Church of England is headed by the King of England, or was. And they were Roman Catholic. And King Henry VIII had already had an annulment with someone, and he married Catherine of Argyle and wanted another annulment, and the Pope wouldn't give him another annulment, and so he split away from the Roman Catholic. That's how that church was started. It was started because King Henry VIII wanted a divorce and the Pope wouldn't give him one. Is that a reason to start a church? That's why the Church of England was broke away from the Roman Catholic Church. Had nothing to do with doctrine or anything other than the king couldn't get a divorce. Now, out of that church, interestingly enough, the Church of England is also known as the Anglican Church. That's another term for it, the Anglican community, worldwide thing. Here in America, the Church of England is known as the Episcopalian Church. So when you see the Episcopalian Church, know that they were started because King Henry VIII wanted an annulment from Catherine of Argyle. And that was the reason that church was started. Now, out of that church came the Methodist Church. John Wesley was an Episcopalian priest. You know somebody else that was studying to be an Episcopalian priest, or not Episcopalian, Anglican? This one will shock you. A guy by the name of Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin's degree is in theology. The man that wrote Origin of Species went to church to become an Episcopalian priest. He had a hard time with it and ended up writing the Origin of Species, which is we've been battling against ever since. Anyway, John Wesley broke away from the Episcopalian Church and started the Methodist Church, which, if you follow it back, it's because King Henry VIII wanted an annulment. That's why all of those, and then you've got all the Pentecostal churches and the Assemblies of God and all of them, they came out of the Methodists. So if you trace all of this back and you say, well, everybody teaches that Jesus died on Friday and rose again on Sunday, well, of course they do. They all go back to the same place. Okay? So understand that now what I'm going to teach this morning is a little bit different than that. But it's not something that I invented. It's not something that Conrad invented. It's not something that Ben invented. I was taught this when I was 5 years old in a missionary Baptist church. Baptists have always taught this. Now, some of them have now changed, just like some of them have changed with a lot of things over the centuries. But this is the doctrine that was taught for years and for centuries. Okay? So the first thing we want to look at is the fact that over in John chapter 20, we have the fact that the greatest fact of the Bible is that Jesus of Nazareth is the Son of God. That is why we are here. And in John chapter 20, verses 30 through 31, John says, "And many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book." Stop right there for a second. There's a verse, a chapter over, chapter 21, verse 25. It says, "And there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written." The number of miracles that we have accounted for in the Bible are nowhere near the number of miracles that he performed. The things that he did while he was here in a 3.5-year ministry were so far beyond what we have record of. It's amazing that anybody doesn't believe that he was the Christ. He gave ample testimony of who he was while he was here. But back to our verse, and many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written, that ye might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life through his name. And the life that he's talking about is the life here, because believing in Christ is not your way to get life in the next life. He's referring to the life here. In John chapter 10 and verse 10, he says, the thief cometh not but for to steal and to kill and to destroy. I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. So it's more of an abundant life that you receive as believing in Christ. And when you think about it, that's part of the salvation that we talk about all the time. When we talk about temporal salvation, the fact that we know that we can do something other than worrying about whether or not we're going to go to heaven. That we can get on with our life and do things that are more productive than just spending all of our time doing that. Now I want you to turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 15. 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where Paul is writing. We're going to look at verses 1 through 4. Because this is the reason that we're going to examine this topic as closely as we are this morning. 1 Corinthians 15:1, moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel which I preached unto you, which also ye have received, and wherein ye stand, by which also ye are saved. Watch this. If you keep in memory what I preached unto you. Is that another requirement for eternal salvation? Now I have to keep in memory everything that Paul said? If I forget anything, I might lose my salvation? I have to believe and I have to remember everything No, of course not. It's not talking about that. This is why when you see that word saved, you have to ask the question, saved from what? Well, most of Paul's writing, and it's interesting that I've had this conversation with people in my office before. When you look at who Paul wrote his letters to, he didn't write them to lost, dead, alien sinners trying to tell them how to get saved. 1 Corinthians says, Paul, chapter 1, you don't need to turn to this, but it says, Paul, called to be an apostle of Jesus Christ, through the will of God, and Sustus our brother, unto the church of God which is at Corinth, to them that are sanctified in Christ Jesus, called to be saints, with all that in every place call upon the name of Jesus Christ our Lord, both theirs and ours. That's who he wrote this letter to. He wasn't writing this to lost people, telling them how to get saved eternally. He was writing it to eternally saved people, telling them how they got saved and telling them what God wanted them to do in the future. And if you look through all of the letters, that's who they're written to. They're not written, this is not an instruction book on how to get to heaven. This is an instruction book on how to live here. Okay? Back to our text. We're preaching, okay. For I delivered unto you first of all, verse 3, that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, and that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. I want to look at the Scriptures. I want to look at what the Bible says about when he died, when he rose again, and make sure that it fits according to the Scriptures, not according to the traditions of the elders, not according to what people think, but according to what the Bible says. It says here that he rose again the third day. How do you get 3 days out of from Friday afternoon until Sunday morning? That's kind of a stretch. I guess you could count Friday because you got an hour of it, and then Saturday, and then, well, he rose at Sunday. that's kind of a stretch. And as we go through, we're going to see it's even a bigger stretch. Now, there are a couple of things that are said in the Bible about this, about when it was that he rose. There's one found over in Matthew chapter 16. Matthew 16 and verse 21. Where it says, "From that time forth began Jesus to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed, and be raised again the third day." The third day. Okay? That's important to hang on to. He himself said the third day. Look also at Matthew chapter 26. We'll see this worded a little bit differently. Matthew chapter 26, verses 59 through 61. "Now the chief priests and elders and all the council sought false witness against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Yea, though many false witnesses came, yet found they none. At the last came two false witnesses, and said, This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and to build it in 3 days. Okay? Now, if you compare this with what John says over in John chapter 2. John chapter 2 and verse 18. Then answered the Jews and said unto him, What sign showest thou unto us, seeing that thou doest these things? Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will rise it up. That's what he was talking about. That's what he was being quoted at. Then said the Jews, 46 years was this temple in building, and wilt thou rear it up in 3 days? But he spake of the temple of his body. Okay? In 3 days. We have on the third day, and we have in 3 days. That's important. And finally, in Matthew chapter 27 and verse 62, it says, Now the next day, following the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate, saying, Sir, we remember that deceiver said, while he was yet alive, After 3 days I will rise again. Now, this is interesting. This is very interesting, because as we're going to see, the next day that followed the day of the preparation, that's the Sabbath, right? That's the Sabbath day. And the chief priests are getting together and working on the Sabbath day? How many times did they try to stone Jesus because he was working on the Sabbath day? And yet they're working on the Sabbath day. Is there any wonder why he called them hypocrites and blind guides and of your father the devil? They didn't even abide by their own rules. But here he's talking about after 3 days. I don't care how you do the math. You can't kill somebody on Friday, have them rise on Sunday, and that be after 3 days. It doesn't add up. Okay? So, the next thing I want you to see, I want you to turn, we're in Matthew, look at, or no, we're not in Matthew. Go back to Matthew chapter 12. There's only one sign that Jesus Christ ever gave of his being the Messiah. Since there's only one sign that he gave, I would think that that sign is important. This is the only sign that he ever gave to anybody, that he was in fact the Son of God. In Matthew chapter 12 and verse 38. Then certain of the scribes and of the Pharisees answered, saying, Master, we would see a sign from thee. But he answered and said unto them, An evil and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given to it, but the sign of the prophet Jonas. For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. That's the sign that Jesus was the Messiah, that he would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. And you cannot make the math work from Friday at sundown till Sunday at sunup. You cannot get 3 days and 3 nights out of that. I don't care what kind of theoretical physics class you've taken. It doesn't work. The math doesn't add up. He said he'd be in the ground 3 days and 3 nights. Okay? Now over in Jonah, you don't need to turn here, but Jonah chapter 1 and verse 17, this is what he's referring to. Jonah 1:17 says, now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah. You know, people poo-poo this all the time. They talk about Jonah. There's no way the whale could swallow a man and he could live in there for 3 days, and, you know, that couldn't happen. And it says God prepared a great fish. That fish may have only lived 4 days. Could any of you live for 4 days without eating? You think any of us could make it? I could probably live for a lot longer than 4 days, and it'd probably do me some good to get rid of some of this if I went 4 days without eating. I could certainly live 4 days without eating. The stomach acids in my body don't have to chew anything up for 4 days. God could prepare a great fish that could swallow somebody to live for 4 days, because he's only got to keep him in his belly for 3. See, that's the problem. They just don't want to believe the word of God. But anyway, it says, now the Lord had prepared a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. That's what Jesus is referring to. That's the sign. That's how long Jonah was in the belly of the fish. That's how long Christ would be in the heart of the earth. And also, if you look at Matthew chapter 16 and verse 4, 16 and verse 4, where Christ says, a wicked and adulterous generation seeketh after a sign, and there shall no sign be given unto it but the sign of the prophet Jonas. And that's the sign of the prophet Jonas. Jesus Christ himself said that he would be in the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. So if he rose again according to the scriptures, we have to be able to put this together to where he was in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights, or he misses his own sign. He's not who he said he was. Okay? It's that vitally important. Now I want you to turn to John chapter 11, just to prove that he knew how long a day was. John chapter 11, verses 9 and 10. Well, let's look at verse 8. His disciples say unto him, Master, the Jews of late sought to stone thee, and goest thou hither again? Jesus answered, Are there not 12 hours in the day? There's 12 hours in the day, aren't there? Don't we already know that? Would that not also mean that there's 12 hours in the night? So a day and a night is 24 hours times 3 is 72 hours. So if you're in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights, you're in the ground for 72 hours? Make sense? Would you not have to be? If you're going to follow the sign of the prophet Jonas? And also, I want you to look at something else. Turn back to Genesis chapter 1. Because God's order of things is backwards from what we think, as it so often is. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 5, it says, And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night, and the evening and the morning were the first day. According to God's reckoning, night comes first. The evening comes first, then the morning. That's what makes a day. Night, we seem to think that the day comes first and then the night. And that's the way our calendar works. If you look at a calendar, today today, actually, what is today? Today is the 13th of April. It began at midnight, right? And it's going to end at midnight, and that's when the 14th will start. Where God's calendar didn't work that way. God's calendar worked from sundown to sundown. That's how his calendar worked. That's going to be important to note here in a few minutes, especially with the little chart that you've got. Okay, I want you to also turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 11. Because you might be thinking, well, what's all this have to do with anything? Why is it all that important? I want to show you. 2 Corinthians chapter 11, verse 2. Well, let's look at verse 1. Would to God you could bear with me a little in my folly, and indeed bear with me. This is Paul writing to the church of Corinth. For I am jealous over you with godly jealousy, for I am espoused you to one husband, that I might present you as a chaste virgin to Christ. But I fear that lest by any means as the serpent beguiled Eve through his subtleties, so your mind should be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ. You stop and think about how simple the doctrine of God is. How simple it is. If you're a child of God, you're a child of God. It's that simple. It's just that simple. You don't need to go do a bunch of works. You don't need to do a bunch of extra stuff. It's just very simple. You don't have to know all the rules to get to heaven. If you're one of God's children, you're one of God's children. He saw you and knew you before the foundation of the world. He wrote your name in a book. You didn't do anything. That's how simple this is. And Paul was afraid that these people in Corinth would be taken away from that and brought into something where they felt they had to do something themselves, which is what we see all over the place. People thinking that they have to work their way into the family of God. For if he that cometh preacheth another Jesus, whom we have not preached, where did I lost my, see, this is why the big fonts are better. Or if you receive another spirit which you have not received, or another gospel which you have not accepted, you might well bear with him. He was afraid that they might listen to this. Now, I threatened Wendy, I was going to bring in apples and oranges. And she said, you'll scare them to death if you bring in apples and oranges again, so don't do that. So I didn't bring in apples and oranges to show you this. But these words that are translated here, another, there are two Greek words that translate here. The first one of these words, where it says, if he that preacheth another Jesus, that is the Greek word elon. Okay, eloniesou is what's written there. That means another Jesus of the same kind. So if I were to hold up an apple and say I would like another, and you gave me another apple, you would give me another of the same kind. Right? Make sense? Okay. The another spirit and the another gospel, it's a different Greek word. The another spirit is etron. That word is etron, and it's also etron in the other gospel. Evangelion, etron means another gospel, but it's not the same as elon. So if I hold this apple and ask for another, you might give me an orange. It's another fruit. See, it's another of a different kind. And that's what Paul was talking about here. Even though you see these words another, he's talking about another spirit that's different and another gospel that is different. That was his fear, that someone was going to come to them and preach to them a Jesus that looked like the Jesus that he had taught, but their gospel was a completely different gospel, and the spirit was a completely different spirit. That's what Paul was afraid of. He talks about this again over in Galatians chapter 1. Which is the next book right after 2 Corinthians. Galatians chapter 1, verses 6 through 8. Where he says, I marvel that ye are so soon removed from him that called you unto the grace of Christ unto another gospel. Now, that another is etron. Etron evangelion, another gospel of a different kind. That's what he's saying, which is not another. You say, well, what do you mean? Another which is not another. Well, what does that mean? That particular another is a law, which is of the same kind. So he was afraid that they were being called into a gospel, another gospel, a different gospel that was not the same as the one that he had been teaching. That's what he's saying here. And that's the fear that we have constantly, that somebody might be swayed into something that is completely different. That's why it's so important that we pay attention to what the Scripture says about things, so that we're standing on this. And if you're standing on this book, then you're standing on what God said. Now, what did Christ say about his death and resurrection? That he would be in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights. Not a day and 2 nights. Half the amount of time that he said. Okay? So let's look at the timeline of the events surrounding the crucifixion and the resurrection. First, I want you to turn to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. This is where God gives Moses the very beginning instructions for the Passover. Exodus chapter 12. We're actually going to look at verses 6, but I want to start here at verse 1 for a reason. I'm going to make comment, and then we're going to come back to it at the end of this. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you. That's going to be important in a while. We're talking about the month Nisan. This is the Hebrew month Nisan, which was the 7th month in the civil calendar of the nation of Israel. You don't have to talk to an old school Baptist to find this. You can find this in any Bible dictionary. But when the Passover came along, it's almost as if they put them on a fiscal year. You know what a fiscal year is? Where even though the year might start January 1 and end December 31, I might start a corporation where the fiscal calendar starts in July. And so I file taxes from July to July. Okay? God changed the calendar and took the month Nisan, which was the 7th month. That's going to be extremely important here at the end of today's lesson. The 7th month, and turned it into the first month because of the Passover. I want you to remember this is the first month from this point forward. Okay? Everybody on the same page with me? Okay. Speak ye unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, in the 10th day of this month, they shall take to them every man a lamb according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house. And if the household be too little for the lamb, let him and his neighbor next unto his house take it according to the number of the souls. Every man according to his eating shall make you count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male of the first year. You shall take it out from the sheep or from the goats. And this is what I'm looking for. And ye shall keep it unto the 14th day of the same month. 14th day of the month Nisan. If you look at your chart, you will see that that's the day where the calendar starts. You shall keep it until the 14th day of the same month, and the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill it in the evening. And they shall take of the blood and strike it on the 2 side posts and on the upper floor post of the houses wherein they shall eat it. And when they shall eat the flesh in that night, roast with fire, and on and on. Okay? We're talking about the Passover. If you've ever seen the 10 Commandments, if you've never seen it, I'm sure it'll be on this week. It always is. With Charlton Heston. And this is when they kill the lamb and they spread the blood on. And the little mean guy, what was his name? He was always a bad guy in the gangster. Yes, Robinson. Yeah, Edgar G. Robinson played he was in there. Yeah, so, and he was trying to get him to stop. He didn't want the blood on his doorpost. Anyway, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about the Passover. And when did they eat the Passover? It was pretty explicit, was it not? On the 14th day of the month Nisan, which had been the 7th month of the calendar. It was being changed to the first month as far as the sacred calendar is concerned. And like I say, I've got a deal in the back of this Bible that'll show you that. Nobody made that up. That's well known. Okay? So, now that you have that background, I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 26. And let's see when they ate the Passover. Matthew chapter 26, verse 17, says, Now the first day of the feast of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus, saying unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare for thee to eat the Passover? What day do you think that would have been? What day do you think Jesus would have eaten the Passover? Well, the 14th day of Nisan, that's what the law said, right? And he said, Go into the city to such a man, and say unto him, The master saith, My time is at hand. I will keep the Passover at thy house with my disciples. And the disciples did as Jesus had appointed them, and they made ready the Passover. Now, when the even was come, he sat down with the 12. Okay, so that's the Passover. He's going to eat the Passover. Do you not think that he would have kept the law properly and had the Passover at the time you're supposed to, which is on the 14th day of the Hebrew month at Nisan? Obviously he would. Turn also to Mark chapter 14 and verse 12. This is a parallel passage. Mark 14 and verse 12. And the first day of unleavened bread, when they killed the Passover, his disciples said unto him, Where wilt thou that we go and prepare that thou mayest eat the Passover? And he sendeth forth two of his disciples, and saith unto them, Go into the city, and there shall be a man with you, and on and on and on. He's going to eat the Passover according to the law. Would he not eat it according to the law? And the law said you do it on the 14th day of the Hebrew month Nisan. I know I'm beating a dead horse to death here, but it's really important that you see this. You see, we know what day Jesus died. We can mark it on a calendar. We know exactly what day he died. And yet, this is Palm Sunday, and next Sunday, the 20th of April, will be Easter, the day that most people recognize that he rose from the dead. But last year was in March. And next year it'll be some other time. And yet we know the specific day that he died, as I'm going to show you here. We know exactly what day he died. And I'm not any brighter than any other theologian that ever came along. You don't think the Pope knows this? Of course he knows this. He's smarter than I am. He can do math. Okay? So we know the day that Christ died. Turn also to Luke chapter 23. I'm sorry, Luke chapter 22. Getting ahead of myself. Luke 22 verse 7. Then came the day of unleavened bread, when the Passover must be killed, and he sent Peter and John, saying, Go and prepare us the Passover, that we may eat. And they said unto him, Where wilt thou that we prepare? And he said unto them, Behold, when ye are entered into the city, there shall a man meet you, bearing a pitcher of water. Follow him into the house where he entered in, and ye shall say unto the goodman of the house, The master saith unto thee, Where is the guest chamber where I shall eat the Passover with my disciples? And he shall show you a large upper room furnished, there make ready. And they went and found as he had said unto them, and they made ready the Passover. And I'm sure that there was a big picture behind them of where everybody was to sit, and they were all going to be on one side of the table. And like Michelangelo, was that Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo, one of them that painted the Last Supper, right? So in the upper room. So he's giving them the instructions, but it's very important to note what day. 14th day of the month Nisan. I need to get one of these for myself. It's a shame that I'm such a horrible artist that I couldn't draw this on the board. So the people out there in camera land will just have to follow along the best you can. Okay. Now, the crucifixion, turn to Mark chapter 15. We know that Jesus he ate the Last Supper with his disciples. He then instituted the communion service that we're going to take here in a little while, and use the elements of the Passover. That's why the unleavened bread and the wine, that's what happened to be sitting at the table at the time. And he instituted the communion service at the end of that Passover meal. He then got up, washed the disciples' feet. They then sang a hymn, went into the Garden of Gethsemane. He was in the Garden of Gethsemane when he was arrested. When Judas had betrayed him, he was arrested. He went through one mock trial at the Sanhedrin when they decided that he was guilty of blasphemy. They then took him before Pilate. Pilate sent him to talk to Herod, I think, and then he came back to Pilate, and then finally at 9 o'clock in the morning, they crucified him. Okay, he had been scourged first, and then at 9. So all this went on from the time of sundown, or around sundown, when he had eaten the Passover, until he was nailed to the cross. It's now 9 o'clock in the morning. 9 o'clock the following morning. Okay? Mark chapter 15 and verse 42 says, "And now when the evening was come," because, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong place. Mark 15:25. "And it was the third hour, and they crucified him." Now, remember, God's calendar starts at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock in the morning starts the day. The third hour is 3 hours after 6 o'clock in the morning. That's 9 o'clock in the morning. Okay? Make sense? So it was the third hour when he was crucified, when it began. Mark chapter, let's see, look at verse 33 through 37. "And when the sixth hour was come," well, what time would that be? If the third hour is 9 o'clock in the morning, then the sixth hour is going to be noon, right? Add 3 hours to it. Or add 6 hours to 6 a.m. and you're at noon, right? "And when the sixth hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the ninth hour." That's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay? "And at the ninth hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani," which is being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" "And some of them that stood by when they heard it said, Behold, he calleth Elias. And one ran and filled a sponge full of vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink, saying, Let alone, let us see whether Elias will come. And Jesus cried with a loud voice and gave up the ghost." 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Crucified at 9 o'clock in the morning, gave up the ghost at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Probably the fastest death on a cross that ever happened. You know, there were people that hung on those crosses for weeks. Crucifixion is a very slow and agonizing death. Birds would eat you before you would actually die. It was a horrible thing to have to go through. That was one of the reasons that they would scourge you almost to where you would be almost to the point of death before they put you on the cross, and you'd still be up there for several days. While we may not get to the verse this morning, you remember that there's a point at which Pilate sent out the order for them to break the legs of these people so that they would die quicker, because they had to get them off. The Jewish law said you had to get them off the cross before sundown, because that's when the Sabbath would begin. So we've got to get them off the cross. We can't leave them up there. So they would break their legs, and the reason that you would break their legs is while you're hanging there, you basically suffocate, because all of your muscles and everything are sagging into your chest and you can't breathe. But you could flex your legs just enough to get a breath to hold on for as long as you could hold on. And then, there was interestingly enough, I just saw a video the other day about, and a completely different topic, but there was a whale. It was on one of these things on YouTube where there was a whale that had been caught in a net, and these people had come across him, and they ended up getting the net cut off, and they saved the whale. But you could watch this whale as he was just about ready to die, and then he would get just enough air to hang on for another couple of minutes. Well, that's the way it was during the crucifixion. You would just lift yourself up enough to get a little bit of air in there, because what actually killed you was you suffocated. That was the actual way that and eventually you'd give out. You'd run out of energy. Well, if they break your legs, you can't lift yourself up with your legs anymore, and you can't, so you would die quicker. And they marveled that Christ was already dead. He'd only been there 3 hours and he was already dead. But the important point is, and I've taught on this before, Christ had finished what he came to do. And please pardon, I know this is going to sound crude, but I don't know how else to say it. He had no reason to hang around any longer. It was time to go. He decided when he was going to die. He gave up the ghost. No one killed him. In fact, he said, you know, in one of the passages, that he laid down his life for his friends. He made the decision. Now, I know there's a lot of different stories out there that preach really good about the crucifixion, but the fact of the matter is, Christ himself made the determination. He was finished. When he said it is finished, it was finished. He'd done what he came to do, and so he gave up the ghost. Okay, kind of a side note there. Look also at Matthew chapter 27. Matthew chapter 27. We're going to look at verses 45 through 50. Now from the 6th hour there was darkness over all the land unto the 9th hour. Okay, the 6th hour being noon, the 9th hour being 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And about the 9th hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, saying, Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, that is to say, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Some of them that stood there when they heard that said, This man calleth for Elias. And straightway one of them ran and took a sponge and filled it with vinegar and put it on a reed and gave him to drink. The rest said, Let be, let us see whether Elias will come to save him. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. So he died around 3 o'clock, right? We see that. We see he was crucified at 9 a.m. He died at around 3 o'clock. We'll look at one more passage over in Luke's Gospel, chapter 23, and verse 44. And it was about the 6th hour, and there was a darkness over all the earth until the 9th hour. So far all three of these accounts agree. And the sun was darkened, and the veil of the temple was rent in the midst. And when Jesus had cried with a loud voice, he said, Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit. And having said thus, he gave up the ghost. Now when the centurion saw what was done, he glorified God, saying, Certainly this was a righteous man. And all the people that came together to that sight, beholding the things which were done, smote their breasts and returned. And all his acquaintance and this is important, and the women that followed him from Galilee stood afar off, beholding these things. The women, his mother, Mary Magdalene, all of those women were at the crucifixion. This is vitally important that you understand this. They were there. They watched it. They watched it happen from 9 in the morning until he died at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Okay? It's important to understand. Now, he was buried in a hurry. He had to be in the ground before the sun went down, or roughly 6 o'clock in the evening. Otherwise, you would be violating the Sabbath. So, and most of you know this story. They got him off the cross. Was it Joseph of Arimathea begged for the body of Christ? Otherwise, they would have thrown him in a mass grave somewhere, in some pit somewhere with a whole bunch of other guys. But he begged the body of Christ They put him in the tomb. They wrapped him up with the burial clothes, where they would take linen. They would wash the body first. They would then wrap the body in linen. They would then put myrrh and aloes, a kind of a paste substance, together, and then wrap another section of linen, and then more myrrh and aloes, and then more and more linen, basically like a mummy. Wrap him up like a mummy. That was the way that the Jews would bury people. The only thing that would be open would be the face, and then they would have what they called it a napkin in the Bible, but it was like a turban that went on the head. So he was wrapped up in this myrrh and aloe paste linen cloth until they ran out of material, with this turban on his head. And as this myrrh and aloes dries, it becomes the consistency of somewhat soft concrete. You've seen pictures of mummies, how they're wrapped up in that stuff. So if the crucifixion didn't kill him, being wrapped up in that stuff would. Okay, so he wasn't just laid on a shelf with a sheet over the top of him. He was wrapped up like a mummy laying in this tomb. The man was dead, clearly dead. But he was buried in a hurry. They had to get this done and be done with it, because otherwise now the Pharisees are going to come after them for breaking the Sabbath. We read in Mark chapter 15. Mark chapter 15 and verse 42. Now when the even was come, because it was the preparation, that is the day before the Sabbath, that's important, Joseph of Arimathea, an honorable counselor, which also waited for the kingdom of God, came and went in boldly unto Pilate, and craved the body of Jesus. And Pilate marveled if he were already dead. And calling unto him the centurion, he asked him whether he had been any while dead. And when he knew it of the centurion, he gave the body to Joseph. Okay, so let's see. Look also at Luke chapter 23. And all we're trying to do is just establish the timeline of what went on. Luke chapter 23 and verse 50. And behold, there was a man named Joseph, a counselor, and he was a good man and a just. The same had not consented to the counsel and deed of them. He was of Arimathea, a city of the Jews, who also himself waited for the kingdom of God. This man went unto Pilate and begged the body of Jesus, and he took it down and wrapped it in linen and laid it in a sepulchre that was hewn in stone, wherein never man before was laid. And that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on. And the women also which came with him from Galilee followed after, and beheld the sepulchre and how his body was laid. And they returned and prepared spices and ointments, and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandments. I want you to pay very close attention to this, because we're going to see something in a minute that is going to help shed light on this or create a contradiction. Okay? Make note of this. And they returned and prepared spices and ointments, and rested the Sabbath day according to the commandment. Okay? Look at John chapter 19. John chapter 19, verse 31. The Jews therefore, because it was the preparation that the body should not remain upon the cross on the Sabbath day, for that Sabbath day was an high day. Why do you suppose that's in there? That Sabbath day was a high day. We might have to investigate that and find out what he means by that, what that high day is. Besought Pilate that their legs might be broken and they might be taken away. Okay, so we have this little term here, high day. We're going to look at that in just a couple of minutes. And then finally, verses 40 through 42, it says, Then took they the body of Jesus, and wound it in linen clothes with spices, as the manner of the Jews is to bury. Now in the place where he was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new sepulchre wherein never was man laid. There laid they Jesus, therefore, because of the Jews' preparation day, for the sepulchre was nigh at hand. This is a close place. We've only got a couple hours. Had to get him down off the cross, wash the body, go through all the process that they go through, lay him in there, slam the door shut, right? Okay. Now, I have a question for you. We see that the women that followed Jesus rested on this on the Sabbath day. Turn to Mark chapter 16, and we're told that they had spices. And then they rested on the Sabbath. Is that not what we just saw a minute ago? That they prepared spices and then rested on the Sabbath, right? That's what we just read. Correct? Everybody with me on this? Okay. I want you to go to Mark chapter 16. Mark 16 and verse 1. And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him. We just read that they prepared the spices and then rested on the Sabbath. This verse says that they'd prepared the spices before the Sabbath. If you look at the grammatical structure of this verse, it says, when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome had bought. That is pluperfect tense, which means that it is an action that is completed prior to another action in the past that's under consideration. So we have a verse in the Bible that says that they bought spices and then rested on the Sabbath. Right? We have this verse that says that was finished, that this was done before the Sabbath. Now, question, when did they buy the spices? When did they buy these spices? They were at the cross during the crucifixion. They weren't out shopping. They weren't out shopping for spices while Christ was hanging on the cross. When did they buy them? When did they prepare them? If they had them prepared, why did they not put them on the body when they buried him? They were at the tomb. We've already seen that. They were there. They saw where he was laid. If they already had the spices ready, why'd they have to go back? Why did they have to go back and worry about who's going to roll the stone away if they already had the spices? We're told that they had them before the Sabbath, and they were ready to go. So if he was crucified on Friday and they had to get him off the cross because the Sabbath was approaching, well, why didn't they just go ahead and use the spices? They already had them. And why would they have already had them? Even though he had told people that he was going to be crucified, nobody was listening to him. You look at the attitude of the people, they were heartbroken when he was killed. They didn't understand that until after he had risen again. You see, the problem is the Bible says that they had the spices before the Sabbath. So my question is, if they had them before the Sabbath, why didn't they put them on the body to start with? Why did they have to come back? The answer is this. There's more than one Sabbath that week. There was more than one Sabbath that week. Remember that verse we saw at, for that Sabbath day was an high day? Remember that you have the weekly Sabbath. Happens every week from Friday at sundown until Saturday at sundown. That's the weekly Sabbath. Happens week after week after week. But the festivals were considered Sabbath days as well. I want you to turn to Leviticus chapter 23. Leviticus chapter 23, beginning at verse 1. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them concerning the feasts of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of rest and holy convocation. You shall do no work therein. It is the Sabbath of the Lord in all your dwellings. These are the feasts of the Lord, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their seasons. In the 14th day of the first month. The 14th day of the first month. We talked about this earlier, how that this was originally the 7th month that was changed to the first month under Moses. That's Passover. There's a Sabbath that happens there. And it doesn't matter if it falls on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday. Now, the Jews had taken the position that they would never run two of them back to back, but that wasn't God's rules, that was the Pharisees' rules. So if that holy day fell on a Thursday, well, they wouldn't hold two of them back to back because you can't keep the bank shut that long. Okay? It's kind of like today, or in this day and age. Thanksgiving, we have a holiday called Thanksgiving. Most places, other than retail shops, are closed for a 4-day weekend. You're not going to shut a bank down for 4 days. They lose too much money doing that. Okay? Well, you could have in other words, there were 4 times of the year you had multiple, actually there were more than 4. Passover, you had it at the preparation day, you had another one the following 7 days later. So in that period of over a week, you had 3 Sabbath days. Okay? And the day that Christ was crucified was the day of preparation, and that was a high Sabbath that was approaching. It wasn't the weekly Sabbath. It was the Passover Sabbath. And that can fall on any day of the week because it's according to a date on the calendar. Not the way it is now. It's not, we don't look at it now from a standpoint that it's the first Sunday following the first full moon after the spring equinox or whatever. That's how we move Easter around. That's why it changes from year to year. It's based on a solar calendar kind of a thing. But the Passover was a date. It was an anniversary date of when they came out of Egypt. And that was a high day. There were multiple Sabbaths, not just the one. Now, I want you to turn another point I want to make, just so that you see this. Look again at Matthew chapter 27, because I want to nail this down, because we're talking about when the women had the opportunity to go buy these spices. Matthew 27:55. And many women were there beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him, among which was Mary Magdalene, and Mary the mother of James and Joseph, and the mother of Zebedee's children. You see, the women were there. They weren't out shopping for spices. They were would you be out shopping for spices to bury the guy, or would you be there until he died? Do you go shopping during the hours that you should normally be watching vigil? Of course not. Look also at John chapter 19. John chapter 19 and verse 25. Now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleophas, and Mary Magdalene. You see, they were standing there. So sometime between the time he died and the time he rose, the women had to go buy spices to prepare for the body. They had to then bring the spices to the tomb, and as we're going to see in a few minutes, they were wondering, well, how are we going to get the stone rolled back? How are we going to get in there to do this? Because there was a Roman guard around this thing. How are we going to be able to do that? So, but we're told that they did the preparation, and then they rested on the Sabbath. Obviously, we're not talking about the Friday Sabbath. We're talking about some other Sabbath. Do you see the point? Okay. Now, John chapter 31, or John 19:31, we've already looked at this. It says, "For that Sabbath was an high day." That is in the Greek, that is a singular noun. That's one, meaning one. That Sabbath was a high day. Okay? But in Matthew chapter 28, we see something curious. Matthew chapter 28. In the English, it doesn't change, but it translates a word that's in the plural. Matthew chapter 28 and verse 1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. It says here, in the end of the Sabbath. In the Greek, that is a plural noun. It actually says in the end of the Sabbaths, plural. There were 2 Sabbaths that week. Jesus Christ was crucified before one of them and laid into the ground. Then there was a day in between that was a work day, which gave plenty time for the women to go buy the spices that they needed and prepare them and get them ready. Then there was the weekly Sabbath, when they were then able to rest on the Sabbath day after they had prepared the spices, just like the Bible said, and then they came to the tomb bringing the spices. Okay? Now, in Mark chapter 16, we've read part of this, and I know we're looking at a lot of the same verses again, but we just kind of need to keep things on track. Mark chapter 16, it says, "And when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome had bought sweet spices that they might come and anoint him." If we compare this with Luke chapter 23, and verse 54, Luke 23:54. If I can get the pages to not stick together. Okay, we're talking about Joseph of Arimathea, where it says in verse 54, "In that day was the preparation, and the Sabbath drew on, and the women also, which came with him from Galilee, followed after and beheld the sepulchre." So we know they know where he was. And my question again is, if you already had these spices, you should have already prepared them. You should have already put them on there. You don't need to go back. Why do we have to go back again? But they rested on this other day, and Jesus rose from the dead as the weekly Sabbath was ending. So let's look at this timeline on your little chart. We see that he ate the Passover the evening of Wednesday. Okay? Wednesday evening. Remember that according to the Jewish manner of reckoning, the night comes first, then the day. So the night of the 14th of Nisan comes first. The day of the 14th of Nisan comes after, according to the Jewish calendar. Okay? We're on the right page? Okay. So he eats the Passover. He is then crucified during the day, which would be Wednesday, right? He was then buried at 6 p.m. or sundown, roughly sundown, on Wednesday, which began the 15th of Nisan, which was a high Sabbath day. He was in the ground then. The women couldn't do anything then because it was a Sabbath day. So that next day they had to sit and rest. At sundown, they could then go buy spices, but who's going to go shopping at sundown when you don't even have electricity? You know, they didn't have stores that stayed open 24 hours a day there. So the next day they had to go buy and prepare the spices, which was Friday during the day. At sundown, the weekly Sabbath began. You can't do any work anymore. You have to sit still. So they sat still, and they waited all the way through Friday night and into the day Saturday, according to our reckoning. Okay? Now let's add this up. Jesus was crucified on Wednesday and went into the grave roughly at sundown on Wednesday night, right? So Wednesday night, he's in the ground. Thursday night, he's in the ground. Friday night, he's in the ground. 3 nights. Okay? He's also in the ground all day Thursday, all day Friday, and all day Saturday. Okay? 3 days, 3 nights. Now, when did he rise? He said he'd be in the ground 3 days and 3 nights. Well, if he was in the ground 3 days and 3 nights, then he rose at sundown on Saturday, not at sunrise on Sunday. Well, that kind of throws things off a little, doesn't it? That seems a little odd that he would rise in the middle of the night. Well, let's take a look. Look at Matthew chapter 28, and let's see what the Bible has to say about this. Matthew chapter 28, verse 1. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn around the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. Okay? His countenance was like lightning, and his raiment white as snow, and for fear of him the keepers did shake and became as dead men. And the angel answered and said unto the women, Fear not ye, for I know that ye seek Jesus, which was crucified. He's not here, for he is risen. As it begins to dawn, and they come up to the sepulchre, the angel opens the door, but he's gone. Jesus is already gone. He didn't need anybody to open the door for him. He could go right through the rock. We see that when he appears before the disciples. He didn't have to wait for the angel to roll the door back for him to walk out. He had been gone for 12 hours. He was already risen. Notice it doesn't say, look, here he is, he's alive. No, he's risen already. He's already gone. Look also at Luke chapter 24. Luke chapter 24, and we're going to look at verses 1 through 3. Now upon the first day of the week, that's Sunday, very early in the morning, they came unto the sepulchre, bringing the spices which they had prepared, and certain others with him. And they found the stone rolled back away from the sepulchre, and they entered in and found not the body of the Lord Jesus. Early in the morning. Very early in the morning. And finally, I want you to look at John chapter 20. John chapter 20 and verse 1. The first day of the week cometh Mary Magdalene early, when it was yet dark, unto the sepulchre, and seeth the stone taken away from the sepulchre, while it was yet dark. You know, we talk about dawn. Dawn happens before the sun comes up. If you've ever been up early enough in the morning, it's before sunrise that things start to get light. It's about a half an hour before sunrise, before the sun comes up, that things start to get light. They got there while it was still dark. Dawn was approaching, it was getting there. Stone was already rolled back. He was already gone. Now, if he was in the ground, I'm not saying that absolutely positively at 6:01 and 30 seconds. But what I'm saying is that sometime between sundown and sunrise, he rose again, and he was already gone. And he said that he would be in the ground for 3 days and 3 nights. If he was crucified on Wednesday and rose at sundown on Saturday, he was in the ground for exactly 3 days and 3 nights. Now I want to show you something that's pretty cool. And this only works if you follow this. It will not work with a Friday crucifixion and a Sunday raising. It won't make any sense at all. But it is so beautiful. I saw this and wanted to come out of my skin. This is so, and I don't know exactly, it's over in Genesis. I think we'll start at Genesis chapter 8. And and we're going to close with this and then get ready for the communion service. But I think it's cool. You might not think it's cool. I think this is incredibly cool. Okay? You ready for this? I spent a lot of time talking about the month of Nisan originally being the 7th month of the calendar and then being changed to the 1st month. Well, here's the reason why I wanted to go through that, and that's verifiable in any Bible dictionary. You could do a Google search and find this out. Okay? I didn't think this stuff up. This is anywhere. Okay? Now watch this. Chapter 8, Genesis chapter 8, verse 1. And God remembered Noah, and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged. The foundations also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained, and the waters returned from off the earth continually. And after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. Now watch this. And the ark rested in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, upon the mountains of Ararat. When God decided that the salvation of the human race was finished, the ark rested on the 17th day of the 7th month, the Jewish month Nisan. When God completed his salvation of his children from the penalty of sin, Christ rose from the dead on the 17th day of the 7th month, the Hebrew month Nisan. You can't put that together with a Friday crucifixion and a Sunday rising. The only way this fits is if you follow what the Bible says. And he was crucified on Wednesday. He rose at sundown on Saturday. He was in the ground for precisely 3 days and 3 nights. It's the only way that it adds up. Why would he make it so specific, the date that ark landed on the mountains of Ararat? And why would it turn out to be exactly the same day of the month that Jesus Christ rose from the dead, if we pay attention to what the scriptures say? Now, I wanted to come out of my skin when I saw that. I think that's pretty cool. And with that, I will thank you for your kind and patient attention. And let's prepare for the communion service.